Well, yesterday, Israel withdrew all but one brigade from southern Gaza, saying the troops are resting for future missions, and the war is far from over. But as Iran ratchets up tensions throughout the region, could the war spread to other fronts? And has the Biden administration's tepid and shaky support for Israel emboldened Israel's adversaries, who are ultimately our adversaries as well? Joining me now to discuss this is Carolyn Glick. She's a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Carolyn Glick Show on Jewish News Syndicate. Carolyn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony. It's great to be back on your program again.
So let's talk about this. The IDF's withdrawal from southern Gaza was, some say, unexpected, but they've made very clear the war is not over. And a major military operation appears to be in the makings that could bring about finality of the crushing, if you will, of Hamas.
Well, I mean, I think that the optics of the withdrawal from Khan Yunis by Division 98 were very problematic, coming as they did 72 hours after President Biden sharply criticized Israel in his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu and hurried his administration sped to get the contents of that conversation out to the media in the most pejorative and insulting way possible towards Israel. So I think that ill treatment of Netanyahu at the hands of Biden, and then 72 hours later, Israel pulling out its forces from Khan Yunis, sent the message that the United States has forced Israel to capitulate. And that was a problem. There are tactical rationale for leaving Khan Yunis. We don't want to be sitting ducks, and in the absence of the ability to take full control over the area, because the United States is sowing chaos with massive amounts of trucks coming in, holding God only knows what, most of which is going directly to Hamas. It's very difficult, and then that places our troops in danger. So it's possible that the better plan is to just withdraw and go in for specific raids under the circumstances, the political constraints that Israel is operating under due to the Biden administration's hostility. So that's a possibility, but the optics send a signal that was picked up immediately by Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran that the United States has abandoned Israel, and it's had a bad effect on the situation of the hostages, where Hamas no longer feels that it should make a deal with Israel because there's no reason to, and Hezbollah feels like it has a free hand to attack Israel as well because they believe that the United States no longer supports Israel.
Carolyn, while I would agree that the optics looks a certain way and the media is going to jump on anything that fuels that narrative, you're very close to this, very close to the Israeli leadership. I've had conversations with them, and there's no question in my mind that they are going to see this through because they have to, whether the United States is with them or not. So the Biden administration can say what they want. It'll make it more difficult for them, no question about that. But I do not see any ambivalence whatsoever among the Jewish leadership on what has to be done.
Nor among the Israeli people. I mean, there was just a demonstration by a number of groups that just formed ad hoc. They were so livid at the sense that we may be accepting defeat that they had a major demonstration outside of Gaza this afternoon in Israel to demand victory. So, I mean, the Israeli people saw what defeat looks like on October 7th, and we're not willing to relive that experience ever. And so the stakes are just too high. And I think one of the things that we've seen all along, and not only since October 7th, also before that, is that the Biden administration fundamentally doesn't understand the Israeli people. They think they can snap their fingers and Israel will just salute them and do whatever they tell us. But the Israeli people, particularly since October 7th, understand the implications of the enemy calls to annihilate the Jewish people. We saw what that looks like. We believe them when they say.
It's no longer, theoretical or academic. I mean, that was one of my takeaways when I was walking through one of the kibbutz that had been attacked just north of the Gaza border with some of the residents who said, we came from, and I forget which country they mentioned, because of the rising anti-Semitism, This was someplace in Europe. And that's been a message that's been reiterated over and over. People go to Israel as kind of the last place of protection and safety for the Jewish people. That was shattered on October 7th. Where do they go from here? And I think that's the realization that really embraces or encompasses Israelis in Israel right now that the rest of the world, at least here in America, doesn't fully understand.
Right. I think that the Jews in the diaspora in the United States and Europe and in other countries are beginning to realize it or have realized it in a very graphic way since October 7th as well, because the scale of the massacre and the savagery of what was done to Israel by Hamas and by the Palestinians of Gaza, who joined with the terrorists in the invasion on October 7th, has empowered and inspired anti-Semites of all kinds in the United States to openly attack Jews on the streets in the United States and throughout Europe in a way that nobody had experienced until now. And so the idea that Jews can be safe anywhere if they're not secure in Israel has just been shattered. It's very clear that the security of all Jews everywhere is contingent on Israel defeating our enemies in Israel. So I think that's also something that has become very clear. And I think that the Biden administration doesn't understand the seriousness of purpose not only of Israel, but of our enemies, of Iran, of Hezbollah, of Hamas, etc. And so they think that they can just, again, snap their fingers and say it's over and we're going to get it to a ceasefire, and it never happens that way. So Israel isn't willing to stand down. The people of Israel aren't willing to stand down. The government of Israel isn't willing to capitulate. So I think we're headed for more difficult times with the Biden administration, and we're headed towards more war, unfortunately.
So, Carolyn, for the United States, we bungled Afghanistan and our withdrawal over there, but, we've got a couple of oceans protecting us. Israel doesn't have that luxury. They can't fight to a draw or just pull out of Gaza, because what that will do is not only, Hamas, they're not the fiercest army on the face of the earth. They're a nuisance. They're a problem. They're killers. They're brutal. They're demonic. But you have Hezbollah to the north. You've got Iran and its other puppets that will be emboldened if Israel is not successful against Hamas. Am I correct?
Everybody's watching what happens in Gaza, and and it's really strange, actually. I guess there is a lot of ideological rigidity in the administration that's very, very hostile to Israel and willing to accommodate Hamas, which is stunning. But I think it's almost impossible to not reach that conclusion when you look at the behavior of the administration in the face of the monstrosity that is Hamas, and yet they're supporting them and insisting that Israel not defeat it. So I think it's true that Hamas is a smaller enemy, but they are a conventional army. They have 4 remaining battalions, and they're also a terrorist organization. They're both. They're a guerrilla terrorist organization, and they're a standing army. What the force that invaded Israel was it was the size of a division, organized as units with clear goals and places that they had to take over. But then their action when they took over was savagery. It wasn't just seize territory and move on. It was seize territory and murder everybody as savagely as possible. So that's different from normal armies, but it all the same, you have to look at it as such. And yes, Hezbollah has the same modus operandi, and they're much more powerful.
They're more powerful. They're better equipped. Their armament is actually more powerful, and of course, you still have Iran to deal with. So, if you don't eliminate Hamas, you're going to have to deal with the others. And so I just don't think the Biden administration either is not connecting the dots, or frankly, they don't care, which is actually more troubling.
Right. I think that they have a Chicken Little way of looking at the world, that if they just say that there's going to be a ceasefire, humiliate the government of Israel, try to overthrow the government of Israel by sowing domestic subversion and all sorts of other things, that all the problem is going to go away. If they can just blame Israel for everything, then Iran will be happy and appeased, and they'll stop bothering America, at least until after the elections in November.
It doesn't happen that way.
And that, of course, is not how things work.
Right.
Nothing happens that way. Nothing. It's not Jews aren't responsible for what happened. We're not responsible for the hatred of others. We can only do our best to defend ourselves from that
Right.
hatred, and that's what we're doing in the war.
Final question for you, Carolyn. Any way for this to be taken care of, Hamas being eliminated without going into Rafah?
No. No, I mean, first of all, it's become a symbol, but it's never really been a symbol. It's a symbol in the sense that Israel keeps saying we have to go to Rafah, and so the entire world comes down against Israel saying you mustn't go into Rafah. So it's become sort of a standoff between Israel and humanity that doesn't want the Jews to succeed. But just on the level of the world in which we live, as opposed to some sort of existential, philosophical issue of whether the Jews should be allowed to survive or not, the fact is that Rafah is the last redoubt of Hamas's conventional forces, and they have to be destroyed. And from a strategic perspective, even more importantly, it's the international border with Egypt. And so long as Hamas continues to control the international border with Egypt, it's going to have the ability to rebuild its forces through arms smuggling across the border. So you can't allow them to maintain control over the international border. That guarantees that they'll be able to not only rebuild their military structure, they'll be able to enthrone themselves as the eternal controllers of Hamas and the terror mini-state that they built there.
Carolyn Glick, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today. I know you're very busy.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program. I love to be on your show. It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much, and thank you for your support for Israel.